Welcome to the second episode of the Think Wildlife podcast. Today we have Rhett Ayer Butler, the founder and CEO of Mongabay, the world's leading conservation science news outlet. It was launched in 1999 and has ever since reached a billion views. It has carried out some of the most successful environmental journalism investigations in recent history. So, my first question is, what are some of the biggest challenges faced by the environmental journalism industry?
So there are a lot of challenges doing environmental journalism these days. One of the biggest ones is just the threats that face journalists essentially all over the world, but especially people who are covering environmental issues and also human rights issues. So sometimes this is, physical violence, but it's also things like shrinking press freedoms. So, crackdowns on journalists and journalism outlets. So that could be arrests. It could be, raids by the tax authorities. Another thing that's happening is it can be difficult to get information from officials. So they may only speak with outlets that are friendly to them. So outlets that are critical of governments or companies may not be able to get access to information. Another challenge is news consumption in many countries is declining, and there's some reasons for that. A lot of people are just burned out with all the bad news and sort of overwhelming things happening in the world. Some people no longer trust journalists. So running a media outlet, that's a complex thing. And then another big issue is around kind of fake news, quote unquote. So people don't really know how to distinguish between what's real and what's not real. And then governments will sometimes use quote unquote fake news as a way to suppress news coverage or critical news coverage. So these are all, complicated challenges that journalists are facing today.
In recent years, there's been a lot of misinformation, particularly against climate change and the environmental crisis. So, how at Mongabay do you help tackle the issue of
So misinformation is having a big impact. So on the environmental front, what this means is that people may not be getting the full picture of what's actually happening. And so the way that we're trying to do this is we try to properly cite sources and speak with experts. We also avoid sort of this concept of false balance, where it's a type of balance, a bias you sometimes see where journalists will present an issue with balanced views between two, with balance, sort of giving this balance between two opposing viewpoints, when in reality some of the evidence isn't real. So, for example, like around climate change, some media outlets will always interview like a climate change denier and give sort of like this false equivalence that these two viewpoints are equivalent, whereas it's factually sound, whereas in one case one of the parties is relying on misinformation and misrepresentation. And so we're really trying to avoid that. In terms of sort of confronting misinformation directly, we don't do a lot of that. I mean, really focus on original reporting. But that said, going back, we do sometimes, call out some of this misinformation that's put out by lobbyists and PR agencies. We've done a number of stories like that, kind of debunking pieces by like lobbyists in the palm oil industry and the pulp and paper companies. And a few years ago, I did a piece that kind of address some of the misinformation that was being put out by this prominent author who is saying that deforestation in the Amazon, wasn't a big deal, essentially. So we are very concerned about misinformation, and we do try to address it.
So, what role do you think journalism has in tackling the biodiversity and climate crisis?
Well, so journalism does several things on that front. So one is it can raise awareness about what's happening in the world and why these things are important. Um, a component of that is increasing transparency and accountability, especially for governments and companies, so people understand who's responsible for driving some of this damage that's being caused. Another thing journalism can do is it can help foster an enabling environment for a wide range of stakeholders. So if you do reporting on an issue, then you may elevate voices of NGOs or communities or scientists that wouldn't otherwise get attention. And so that can help foster their work. Journalism can also help identify gaps and opportunities for positive change. And on that front, it can also be a source of inspirational ideas, but also direct action that people can take.
Cover reporting of Mongabay's undercover reporting has helped tackle some of the worst environmental crimes around the world. Which such investigation do you think has been the most impactful?
Well, I mean, so yeah, our work covers all sorts of issues, including environmental crime. And there's been a lot of examples. I guess one of my favorite examples is from a few years ago in the Amazon. There was this company that was a cacao company. Cacao is used for making chocolate. And they were clearing large tracts of rainforest in the Peruvian Amazon. And so we did a lot of reporting on what was going on, which really elevated the issue internationally. And eventually the Peruvian government ruled that the company was operating illegally, and it pulled its permits. And that eventually led to the company getting delisted from London Stock Exchange. And the reason that was important was the company had been planning to raise more money to clear more forest. And so by getting delisted, essentially this 100,000 hectares that was supposed to be cleared wasn't cleared. And so, that has biodiversity and climate impacts. So that's kind of one of my favorite examples of our investigation in environmental crime that, contributed to a real world outcome.
So, more about Mongabay. So, how has environmental journalism changed since the inception of Mongabay? And how has Mongabay also evolved in the last 2 decades?
Yeah, I mean, so Mongabay's evolved a lot. So it's gone from being just me doing reporting on environmental issues to a global nonprofit that has about 80 full-time staff, about 1,000 contributors in about 80 countries. So we have people who are working in many places across several languages. One of the other things that's changed has been the evolution of my role. So, I started out as a writer producing content, but I've had to, radically shift what I do. And so I'm really focused now on management and fundraising. So, my job is quite a bit different than when I started out. In terms of topics we cover, we've gotten more narrow in our focus. So when I was just doing Mongabay myself, Mongabay covered a wide range of issues from like climate change to green design, to like sustainability, to tropical forests, to oceans. Now we've really sort of focused on the intersection of people and nature. So that's things like forests, oceans, wildlife, and the conservation sector. Beyond that, we've also broadened the types of content we produce. So originally Mongabay was just written content. Now we do podcast, video, in addition to written. And then we also create content that's just for social media. And so, 23 years ago when I started Mongabay, there really wasn't social media. But now social media is a major distribution channel for us.
So, recently Mongabay hit 1 billion lifetime views, which is quite a huge feat for such a specific niche. So, what are some of the most prominent digital marketing decisions which helped you achieve this feat?
I mean, the biggest thing has really been creating high quality original content. We've never done SEO. And with our impact driven nonprofit model, we don't even chase clicks. So we really just focus on creating good content. And that's really the marketing strategy that we've embraced. And we actually didn't even have any people on the team who did marketing until late last year when we made our first marketing hire. So the first 22 years there was no marketing at all.
What has been some of your biggest learnings from Mongabay?
Some of the biggest learnings from Mongabay is, I would say, first of all, original content is really important. So just focusing on, creating really good content will sort of help you no matter what channel you rely on. Another thing is just being persistent. So persistent and consistent. So like consistently reporting on an issue over time, can build your audience, but then also just persistence, which is really important for a nonprofit because it can take years to get a grant or a donation. We just got a grant from a foundation that I've been working on for 14 years and had between 70 and 80 meetings and phone calls with over that period of time. So it can take a really long time. That being said, it's also important to sort of prioritize. So really understanding what your strengths are and when you need to say no. So sometimes you have to say no to donors because it's not aligned with your mission, or they're asking for something that's, not consistent with your values or how you do things. So I really focus on investing in what works, what delivers the best results. Another important thing has been knowing, like establishing goals and then measuring progress against them. And so for that, we rely on a lot of data for our decision making. And if we find that the data is showing that something's not working or meeting our expectations, then we need to make adjustments. And I guess lastly, just really being good at communicating to the audience, and that's applicable to really any kind of work you do.
What's the long-term vision for Mongabay in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
So we're actually working on our 2030 strategic plan now. So that's a 7-year time frame, and so it's pretty consistent with what we've been doing the last 5 years. It's really expanding into markets where we feel like our journalism can have a high marginal impact. And so we have, a model for deciding which topics and markets and languages we want to try to expand into. Another area that's a priority for us is we're really looking to build out more, I would say, is scaling up our data journalism. And that includes, a wide range of things, but it's both sort of on the heavy data side, but also how we use that data. So how we visualize that data, for example, and how we integrate that into our products. Supporting environmental journalists is another major thrust for us over the next several years. And so that includes creating more opportunities for journalists to get paid and get trained. And so this year, actually last month, we launched a fellowship program, and we hope to expand that over time. And then lastly, I would say that we're trying to, or focusing on evolving our strategies for how to really reach our target audiences. And this is important because the way people consume information is constantly changing.
Why don't you elaborate a bit about your fellowship programs?
So the fellowship program that we just launched, it's a paid fellowship program in English and Spanish. And it's open for young and aspiring journalists in low to middle income tropical countries that are biodiversity hotspots. And so the goal of the program is to provide more opportunities to get firsthand experience and training for journalists in these countries. And so we have it's a 6-month program. Each cohort has 3 people. So we have 3 in Spanish, 3 in English that are running concurrently every 6 months. And so there's no education requirement. So it's open to, to any journalist, regardless of sort of their formal training. And each journalist works with a main editor, but then they also engage with a wide range of editors from Mongabay. So they get experience of working with, different types of people. And during the course of the 6 months, it's part-time. Each fellow is expected to produce 6 articles. So it's an article per month. And the reason that's important is to land paying work in journalism, you typically need kind of like a portfolio. And so, we're hoping that by doing 6 articles for Mongabay, and getting paid for those articles, that it will help further people in their journalism journey.
So my final question for you is, what would be your advice for young and aspiring environmental journalists?
I mean, the main thing is just to write, because you really need to sort of exercise the writing muscle, I guess you could say, and just getting experience. And so, whether that's writing on social media, on LinkedIn, on your personal blog, just get out there and start writing things. And then, once you feel like your stories are developing, then you can start to use them as pitches for getting paid opportunities. And so, yeah, I mean, really the number one thing is just practice writing, and then also reading. So, reading is a great way to learn how to write better.
So yeah, that is my final question. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for having me. It was nice to meet you, and thank you for the opportunity.